Hi, everyone. Welcome to the August Community Conversations here at HMHI. My name is Ollerton. I am the SafeUT Interim Manager. And today we have a pretty exciting and relevant topic for all the parents and teens out there. We are in back to school season, and with all the excitement of back to school comes the anxieties and fears of just returning back to school and all the social sort of things that go along with that. So we're talking about anxiety and stress and how to prepare your kids for going back to school, how to prepare yourself if you're going back to school. And one of the most concerning issues I think these days is really bullying in the schools. So we're going to address how to approach bullying, how to understand it, and what to do if you feel like there's some bullying going on, how to address it, whether it's in the classroom or online. So in the next hour, we have with us some experts in this area that I will introduce, and we will talk about how to recognize if your student's being bullied, how to help your kids manage fears and anxiety about going back to school, and then we're going to talk about some resources in our community that will help you navigate the next school year. So next to me, I have Dr. Scott Langenecker, who is a clinical neuropsychologist and a professor of psychiatry at the University of Utah.
Hello.
And then next to Scott is Julie Spindler, who is the prevention director for Tooele School County District. And she works in prevention, anti-bullying awareness, mental health awareness, and coordination of SafeUT services. So I'll have both of you sort of introduce yourselves a little bit. So Scott, why don't you go ahead and start and talk about your role here at HMHI?
Yeah, so my role here at HMHI, I'm a professor of psychiatry. I'm an outpatient psychotherapist, so I work with teens who, typically the teens I work with struggle with depression or anxiety. I also do neuropsychological evaluations, sometimes with teens and young adults who might have learning disabilities or attention deficit disorder. I also have a role as a research co-director of the Research and Quality Improvement Program for our SafeUT. And in addition to that, we actually do investigational studies of new therapies to help teens both recover from depression and also prevent recurrence of depression.
Thank you so much. And Julie, tell us a little bit about your role.
So my name's Julie Spindler. I'm the prevention director for Tooele County School District. And my role is just what my title is. I'm over all prevention services for our district as well as social emotional learning. One of those pieces of that is also implementing the SafeUT app with our students and our schools so that they have access to information and help when they need it. So we've done a lot of training with teachers and staff and our students so that they know how to access and get the help that they need. So we do anything from substance abuse prevention, violence prevention, suicide prevention, bullying prevention, and education. So yeah.
Wonderful. We're very excited to have both of you here today and to hear more about your perspective on these issues. So for those who are watching, please feel free to put any questions in Zoom and we will answer as many questions as possible. Other than that, we'll just jump right into some questions. So first question I have is about bullying. Such a big topic. We'll scratch the surface. But really, how do we talk about bullying? Specifically, a parent or a guardian that has somebody in school, how do you recommend that they talk to their kids about bullying? Julie, we'll start with you.
Okay, I think first to make sure everybody is on the same page exactly about what bullying is. And I don't know if you can see this poster that we've made in our district, but really we want to make sure everybody's on the same page about exactly what bullying is, because it has become a catchphrase in our society about even if somebody has conflict with me and doesn't agree with me, then they're bullying me, or if they're having a mean moment. And that's not what bullying is. We have to make sure that everybody understands what the definition of bullying is, that they're being attacked physically, socially, or emotionally. It needs to be a repetitive situation. They have to have asked for that they are being hurt on purpose. And so making sure that we're all on the same page about exactly what bullying is, whether it's the parents, the teachers, administration, it's really important to make sure that definition is understood, because not everything is bullying. So just because somebody is having a mean moment, we've all been there where we've been treated mean, and we have to make sure that we understand that people do treat people mean sometimes, but that doesn't mean that it's a repetitive cycle. So
I think that's so important to point out is the differences between maybe other behaviors and bullying. Do you have examples of maybe some things that are not bullying that you put on there for people?
Sure. Let's say that I'm a sixth grader out on the playground, and I have a way that I play a certain game like kickball or something like that. And Dema, you're another sixth grader, and you have different rules of the game that you've learned. And we have a disagreement and maybe even an argument about that. Just because I think I'm right and you think you're right does not mean that we're bullying each other. We just maybe have a conflict. And so we in our district really try to take the prevention stance and teach problem-solving skills so that people understand, so that kids can learn that at a young age, because we all have to solve problems even in adulthood, right?
Exactly.
So that's kind of where we're at. It doesn't mean that just because you disagree with me does not mean that I'm being bullied. So that's one example, like an example of one.
That's so helpful. Scott, any thoughts on that?
I think it's really helpful to sub-specify the different types of relationship violence that people might experience, and then to normalize some of this is just part of being a human. We're complicated. We have opinions. Sometimes we hold opinions very fiercely, and we can disagree, and maybe disagree in kind of ugly ways. But that repetitive element, I think, is a key component to sort of distinguish between what might be an incident as opposed to a pattern.
And really, conflict can help us grow and see from other people's perspectives. That's one thing. Another thing that in our district we really, with our social emotional learning curriculum and stuff, we all are going to have different perspectives on different issues, and understanding that just because somebody has one opinion in one way doesn't mean that they're right or wrong. And it's okay. It's okay to have different perspectives, and maybe you do something a different way and I hadn't thought of that before. So it can open our minds.
It's true prevention then, because you're not only saying, here's how to look for bullying, but here's how to grow from maybe just sort of the regular sort of stresses of conversations and interactions.
Definitely.
Nice. So this question is for both of you, but there's a wide variety of ages going back to school, right? How do we talk to, say, an elementary school kid about bullying versus a teenager about bullying?
I was just gonna say that there's a developmental pattern to how we address these sorts of things. So as Julie knows better than I do, the social emotional learning curriculum for elementary school and grade school is very different than for high school. In elementary school, we're trying to support healthy behaviors and we're trying to teach healthy behaviors. By the time we get to high school, the kids already know what healthy behaviors are and what are not healthy behaviors. And if they're engaging in bullying, there's a much more intent, volitional aspect to it. Definitely. So it should be handled very differently.
Definitely. Well, and when you're talking about kindergarten and first graders, you're talking more about making friends and how to be a good friend and how to problem solve, and again, having them try to open their minds and understand that other people have different perspectives about lots of different things. So.
Yeah, it's helpful. I think, I always talk with parents in my role too about how do I talk to, my kid about bullying, and it looks so different, like you both said, with the different developmental stages. Another aspect to this is anxiety, right? There's a lot of feelings of anxiety about going back to school through all ages across the spectrum.
how do we talk about anxiety and maybe the differences between like a clinical anxiety versus I'm anxious about this life event and I'm in the same boat as many other people?
Sure. Well, from a school perspective, we really believe in building relationships with kids and parents. So, you know, that's one of the first things. Many times, a child's anxiety may be stemmed from a parent's anxiety about maybe their own school experience. And so we really try to build relationships with our students and the parents so that they trust us and understand that we are there for them, not just for their educational needs, but also for some of their other needs that are happening in their own lives. So that's one thing that we've done in our district.
And I would say that anxiety for most kids is a normal indication that something is important to them. If they're thinking about it a lot, if they're maybe worrying a little bit about it, that's just an indication that it's important. And school is a very important part of our development. For some, they may be even a key to actually unlocking their ability to be comfortable in the classroom and to learn in the classroom. If they don't feel comfortable in the classroom and they're more anxious and not socially connected, they may not actually be able to engage in the learning material as well. So this is a key developmental component of what we're talking about. If it starts to interfere with their willingness to go to school, like their school avoidance, or if there's disruption in their sleep into an arena where we might want to think about having to talk to a professional to develop some new skills that maybe can be learned in the school or amplified in the school, but might need to be strengthened in other places.
It's such an important distinction, right? I think between when is it anxiety that will probably lessen after we just talk through it versus when it's starting to be avoiding school, how do I get extra help for that? So really good distinction. For parents, I mean, you know, we all have our own ways of how we grew up thinking about anxiety and how we understand anxiety now. How would you recommend parents approach anxiety in a way that is helpful for the relays? We can either, you know, go too much on either extreme.
Yeah, I don't know.
Go ahead, you go. This is your wheelhouse.
Yeah. So anxiety is in many ways just a fear of the unknown when you're coming back to school. Maybe you're moving from elementary to middle school or middle school to high school. You know, is my social network still going to be my social network? Are the people who I'm friends with still going to be, you know, connected to me? There's just lots of questions that they want to have answered. And so there's a normative sort of framework of talking about, like, you know, how can we actually be very specific about what you want to do to actually make these things easier. So maybe you walk to school with your friend so that you don't feel anxious walking into the school, or maybe you actually have a play date before school starts, so you actually kind of connect with your friend before you get into school. As you move further up into the developmental curriculum, you know, students are asking deeper and bigger questions like, you know, where am I going to go after school, and who's going to be my social network, and how am I going to connect to someone on an intimate level? And these questions are best handled paying attention to your kid. So sometimes when you talk openly with kids, it kind of reduces the anxiety level. And sometimes it may actually amplify the anxiety level. And so the time and place for when to talk about things is just as important as how they're broached. It's really kind of just building a relationship with your child and finding that comfortable way to talk to them in a non-judgmental way, so that they understand that you're actually an advocate for them and trying to help them problem solve.
But also not sweeping it under the rug, like this will just go away, and, you know, maybe go talk to a school counselor. There are lots of mental health resources in our schools and in our communities throughout that, you know, just ask somebody, is this normal? You may not know, is this normal anxiety, or is it something that I should, you know, maybe get a little bit of treatment for my student? So, you know, it's important to recognize that it's okay to ask questions and okay to ask professionals.
Well, and I think so many families can have those relational conversations with their kids. Julie, what would be a way that the schools can help in those conversations, or how can they support students with anxiety?
Well, we have school counselors, and I would start with the teacher first to see if they're seeing anything in the classroom with their student, because maybe what I'm seeing at home is different than what's happening in the classroom or on the playground. So talking to the teacher or the principal about that, seeing what resources are in the schools. We have school counselors in all our schools that also run maybe social or social skills groups. So and then they also have connections with whether there's a mental health provider in the school or who would be maybe a best fit in the community. It's just important to have an open dialogue and open communication, but also be open-minded, that maybe you've never had a mental health concern in your own family before, and this day and age is different. It's very different right now, and there's a lot of stressors that are going on with our kiddos. So just make sure that you're open and have open communication with those people that you're interacting with, because there are a lot of resources for families and kids. So
I think that's so helpful to know and be reminded of. We have some really great questions coming in for both of you. What are some telltale signs for parents that the anxiety their child is facing may be because of bullying and not necessarily general anxiety?
That's always a puzzle.
Yeah.
So the signs that you're going to see are actually going to be pretty generic signs. So you're going to see kind of an avoidance to going to school. Maybe they drag their feet getting out of the house in the morning. Maybe they're the last person to show up to school and try and sneak into the back of the room. Or maybe they're having trouble sleeping at night, or maybe they're eating less or eating more. These are all kind of just general signs that something's not quite right with your kid. And then you kind of got to play detective and talk to the kid, talk to the teachers, talk to the school counselors, try and sort out what's actually going on. It could just be a developmental phase that just passes. There's a change in just sleep-wake cycles as kids go back to school. That could be it. It could be nothing besides that. Right. So it's good to just sort of, when you see something, dive in and try and figure out what's going on.
I would echo that, definitely. I think open communication, again, with your student as well as with the school to see if they're seeing anything like that.
And I would add, sometimes, we live in the world we live in. Sometimes your relationship with your kid might not be as close as you'd like. Maybe your partner, the other parent, can sort of take the lead, or maybe there's a trusted relative who's kind of a little bit closer with them who could help. So don't feel like you have to do it on your own.
Definitely.
That's so helpful. And I love the word detective, right? Because I think as adults, we're used to having different types of conversations, and with teenagers, where in kids, it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of diligence.
Right. Well, and as you were speaking, I was thinking about my background in substance abuse prevention. And, we know that if a kid has one trusted adult in their life, that's a huge protective factor for them, right? And a lot of times I have two teenagers and they don't want to talk to me about their stuff, right? So it's important to know who those trusted adults are, because a lot of times they will open up to other people, and we have to, as parents, take a step back and say, at least they're going to talk to somebody, right? It may not be me.
And you might even encourage it,
right?
Open that door, say,
right.
Something seems not quite right with you. You want to talk about it, or do you want to talk to somebody else about it? And you might get the answer no and no and no. And then you might say, well, why don't we set up a time to talk with, your Aunt Sherry? And then all of a sudden you open that door and you make it okay to talk about it. Right. So when you said the word detective, I cringed a little bit. You want to be, I know it's my word. You want to be a very gentle detective, not a harsh one.
Yes. Good clarification, right? So another question along these lines is, what about kids that have disabilities or have some, sort of challenges? How do we talk to them about bullying? How do we recognize the signs again in them?
I would say it's the same as with any student, right? But definitely there are times that we have to keep more of an eye on students who may have some other struggles, and maybe not the relationships that other students in our schools have. So again, I'm just going to go back to the communication. If I'm a parent and I'm seeing something at home, I need to make sure I'm communicating with the school about my fears about what's going on, and go from there, really trying to get to the bottom of things with my student, no matter their ability.
I would add, I agree completely. I would add that for all of our kids, but maybe even more so for kids who have disabilities that might affect their ability to do as well as they would like in the classroom, we have to find other avenues for them to feel success and to feel like they belong and that it's a safe place for them. So that's where things like, activities and sports and music become key important places for these kids to feel connected.
Right. Well, and as you were speaking, I thought, a teacher might have between 20 to 35 students in their classroom. So if I know that my student is struggling, go talk to that teacher and say, this is a place that I've found success with him or her. These are some things that I've tried at home that have worked. Because a teacher may not recognize it right off the bat, and they may not, pick up on what interventions might work. So communicate those interventions that you've tried at home that have worked also.
And I would say as a therapist, one of the skills that I build on when kids come to work with me is I ask them for teachers that they have had that have been particularly effective in sort of bringing out some of their strengths and places of growth. And I always find more than one. Our teachers are amazing. And so we can use our teachers as resources. They teach content, but they also support in many other ways.
Definitely.
Everything you're saying kind of leads into this next question that's being asked, which is a tricky one. So like you said, Julie, there's so many new kids coming in. The classroom sizes are quite large. How do, providers, whether that be mental health providers, providers in other areas for children, how do they recognize those kids that are falling through the cracks or get missed? How do we, that's probably a whole nother issue, but what about those kids?
So that's a loaded question. As a parent, you know your student best. If you feel like they're falling through the cracks, talk to the school. As a teacher, I need to make sure I'm knowing what my resources are in the school. Like I said, there's school counselors there's administrators who have community connections. But usually if there's underlying issues, a lot of times that will come out with behaviors that are exhibited in the classroom, and that's when teachers recognize something is going on. In our district, and as well as in other districts, we document all office referrals that happen, and we really try to use it as a non-punitive thing so that we can kind of track and document when kids are coming to the office. Why are they coming to the office? Is it because maybe they didn't have breakfast and they're hungry, so they're acting out? Or, I always like to tell this story that we had a school years ago that when we first implemented entering behavior data into this system that we use, we had a student that, was great most of the time, but every once in a while there was like an outburst. So when we would document it, all of a sudden it showed up that it was always first thing in the morning, and it was always on Mondays, always. So they dug a little bit further. Well, it was every other Monday. So there was a root cause, right? Like they dug in a little deeper and talked to the parent, and it was when the student was coming back from their non-custodial parent, and he struggled. He struggled. So we put wraparound services on those Mondays when he came back to class. And so sometimes we've got to figure out what that root cause is, and collecting data is a lot of times how we do that. So yeah, I just think, again, it's important to know that when a behavior is being exhibited, a lot of times there is a root cause, and we need to figure out as a school system and as a parent what that root cause is.
Yeah, that's so helpful. I would add that in a classroom of 20 to 35, it's the flare-ups that direct and cause the teachers to direct their attention. But the kids who are sort of fading into the background and disengaging are the ones who really need a little bit more push from the parents and push from the counselors to get to the front of the teacher's sort of attention, because when they're managing a classroom and trying to teach content, the kid who might be daydreaming in the background, or the kid who might be worrying about something that's going to happen later in the day, is really easy to miss.
Yeah, and watching their grades, if they're usually a straight A student and they're starting to drop off, what's happening? There's something going on there. So recognizing that as a parent and as a teacher too.
Wonderful, thank you. So another question that's come up is really about social skills groups in schools. Wondering, are those available to students? If not, how do we find out more about just general social skills for students?
Yeah, I think that you would have to check with your district, because every district is different and everybody has different funding sources and those kinds of things. In Twilla School District, we have a school counselor in every school that does social skills groups. And a lot of times they base those social skills groups on what the needs of the students and the asking of the parents is. Whether it's making good friends and being a good friend, whether it's a divorce group or those kinds of things. It's really a matter of just exploring what is available in your area. We also have a counseling grant that then we can do more intensive therapies with our kids, and we've brought social workers into our schools, so that it's nice because it's mental health therapy that's more accessible for parents. A lot of times they're like, I don't have time to get my kid into therapy. I can't take off at 2:00 to take them to their appointment. And so it's been a big success in our district. And I know other districts have social workers that are in their schools too. So it's just a matter of exploring with your school administrators what is available in your schools. And again, going back to the communication piece, like if I am worried because, I just went through a divorce, I need to make sure I'm communicating with that principal and teacher to make sure that they recognize that might be one reason my student is struggling.
Yeah. Well, and it's nice that at least in Tooele School District, how organic it is. So I think it's a great example for parents that are interested to advocate for that in their school districts.
Definitely.
So,
yeah. And I would just add that a lot of times we get, sort of, I think, caught up in like, what is the purview of a school? Like, what is the mandate of a school in terms of providing education for our children? And I would say let's focus more on the outcome. So the outcome is educational success and ability to work in groups. And at a fundamental level, social skills are part of that. They're a big part of it.
They are, definitely. Well, and if you don't build the whole child, you're not going to have as much of a successful child, right? Like you really have to build that social emotional child. And so you've got to have all of those components to really be successful academically. If you can't take care of all the other stuff, all the Maslow's stuff before learning, You've got to be
Absolutely.
able to take care of those basic needs before kids are going to be able to learn and be successful.
Absolutely. I think that's something that we know, but we often forget, right? Because there's so many competing needs and priorities.
Well, the school, that is their purpose, is to educate, right?
Mhm.
But we can't educate without taking care of some of the other needs
Mhm.
that are necessary, other needs of our students.
Absolutely.
And we recognize that.
Absolutely. Let's go back a few steps a little bit to talk about maybe some basic understanding of bullying and how it impacts those who are bullied psychologically. What any sort of statistics or knowledge typically in Utah schools.
Well, I would say first you need to be educated about, like I said at the very beginning, we have to all be on the same page about what bullying is. And in our district, we just in the last couple of years have really hit that hard. Just, this is what it is. And so we have seen decreases in what people are calling bullying. But I think it's more because of education, not because there's been a decrease in bullying, honestly. So what was the rest of that question?
Maybe just,
Sorry.
No, just kind of being able to recognize the effects of bullying
Yeah.
on students, and also just what do we know about bullying in our Utah schools? How prevalent
Right.
is it? What are some
Right.
statistics?
Well, I definitely think that it is prevalent, but again, is it bullying or is it conflict or a mean moment? So I don't know what the statistics are. Do you, Scott?
Well, I mean, you highlight very nicely that the internal perception of bullying
Right.
by students is high.
Yeah.
The objective identification of is that bullying or is that something more akin to showing a preference, like I like this person more than that person. That's not bullying, that's just a personal preference. How you execute that preference could be bullying, or it could just be making a normal decision on how to create your social groups. I would say that the social mechanism of bullying is seemingly complicated, but the easiest way to distill it is this idea that you're implementing a power differential such that the person feels less than or unworthy or unwelcome. You can exclude people without making them feel less than. It requires a special set of skills, but
Right.
it's part of growing up.
Definitely.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes. Well, and this is a multi-part, I think, topic and question too. We know that students that are LGBTQ plus, experience bullying in a different way. Can we talk about maybe some of the challenges that they have and how to support students in our queer community with bullying?
So that's a really loaded question. So the developmental milestone that tweens moving into teens move into as they move into puberty and sexual identity is a complicated one. Even for kids who don't have LGBTQ issues or bullying around that or social exclusion around that. And so the best way to think about it is there's personal bullying, and then there's sort of institutional or cultural exclusion or unwelcomeness. Do we call that bullying? I don't know. Does it feel like bullying to our LGBTQ youth? Absolutely it does. They feel like they're less than, they're not welcome, that they don't have a place where they can grow and thrive and be welcome. And that's a challenge for all of us to really move to creating a place where we can actually accept people for who they are.
Well said.
Definitely.
Well said.
Well, and I think some of it is just education. People understanding where people are coming from. And maybe, we are in the middle of a cultural shift, truly. And people being educated and understanding and accepting is an important piece of what we do as a society. really, not just a school system.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, thank you both so much. Those are, I think, just really thought-provoking answers that lead to more questions, right?
You know, one thing with that too is I think that the SafeUT app is a super great way for people to be able to get some answers and to ask some questions anonymously if they would like.
Yes.
Because sometimes that's a hard thing to talk to people about because they may feel like people don't understand, or they, don't want to accept, what their differences are. And so from a school district perspective and a parent perspective, it's been a great tool for our LGBTQ plus students as well as other students to be able to have an outlet to know that they are being listened to, and they are being treated the way they need to be treated.
Absolutely.
And I would just emphasize your point about a cultural shift. I don't think we have to abandon our values. I think we actually need to implement our values. If we implement our values, then acceptance is the next logical conclusion.
Yeah, well, and thank you for mentioning the app. I think part of, a lot of the bullying talk that we talk about is about victims of bullying or survivors of bullying. And the app really sort of speaks to another group, which is maybe what they call upstanders, or those who are observing the bullying, right? That can turn in a tip, say, hey, I saw somebody being bullied in my class, and that gets sent to the school. So can we talk a little bit about maybe all the different people that are involved in bullying and how to recognize that? So we have the person that's being bullied, but we also have those around who are watching it. We also have the person who is doing the bullying. How do we maybe talk if our child is maybe not necessarily being bullied, but is either doing the bullying or is observing the bullying?
We talked about this earlier. I think we need to be open-minded and know that, I'll just speak as a parent, that my child is not perfect, and that's okay. But what is it that we can learn from that? What is it that I can do to help him understand that what he's doing is hurting other people? Some of it's just an education, but also being open-minded as a parent, that it could be that my child himself is being the bully, and what is it that we can do as a team to make sure that it stops, and get him the assistance and help and understanding that he needs, that what he's doing is hurting others on a repetitive basis. So I think being open-minded and being willing to admit that, like, my kid's not perfect, and that's okay, but what do we need to do to move beyond that?
Yeah.
And I would add, looking the other way, for a kid, if you think your kid might be bullying other children, is not going to help them in the long run. They might be able to get away with, bullying other kids for a short while, but it will catch up to them, and catch up to them in ways that are really not good for them. And so we want to actually help everyone to develop these pro-social adaptive skills. I would add one really important piece. From the perspective of a child who's being bullied, often the scenario is there's a bully, there's sort of people in the social sphere of the bully, and being bullied might assume that all the people in the social sphere of the bully are approving or justifying the bullying, when in fact we know that most of those kids are actually really uncomfortable and don't know what to do. And so part of this social emotional learning is actually providing the skill sets for those kids to actually do something. And a lot of these kids, I end up seeing some of them later, they carry that with them. They feel like they let the person down who's being bullied and they didn't know what to do. And so part of our, part of our role as parents is to sort of explore that space of what do you do in those ambiguous moments? And, it's really hard to advocate for somebody who's being bullied. And how do we strengthen those skills and support those skills?
Yeah, because the bystander doesn't want to be known as the narc, or I don't know the word they use.
Well,
these
and they
days,
may
but-
feel like they're going to be bullied because they're actually standing up for the kid who's been
exactly.
bullied.
They don't want retaliation.
Yeah.
You think about that as adults. We do the exact same thing that kids do. We either turn a blind eye if something's uncomfortable, or and walk away instead of really. We don't want to get involved because it's not our business to enhance those skills as adults and as kids.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think this is such an important avenue of bullying that can really have a lot of positive outcomes if they're addressed. Where do you recommend that parents, teachers, providers go to learn about sort of the structure of bullying in all sides of this? We have, we talked about SafeUT as a way to report bullying. We talk about schools, maybe talking to schools with social learning groups. We know that there's therapy right out there that can help. Where can people go to just learn more about sort of the model of understanding bullying, a model of understanding bullying?
Well, believe it or not, there's a government website that has tremendous number of resources on bullying, anti-bullying programs, statistics, and so on. I would add one thing I think is super important, which is this idea of social skill growth. So when we identify bullying, it's a developmental milestone for some kids. Like that's an opportunity for them to learn, oh, this isn't actually a great way to achieve the objective that I wanted to achieve in the social situation. And that's where the learning comes. So I think a lot of us get stuck in, is it learning or punishment? It's actually learning. And if that fails, then you might move to punishment.
Right.
Thank you so much. Are there resources that we can share now for viewers that would be helpful? Is it the stopbullying.gov or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, right here we got a pamphlet.
Yes.
Yeah. As a district, we just put together, flyers and we sent home information to parents. We do, information nights on different topics, including bullying. And so, just look in your own community for resources. There's lots of agencies that have a lot of information that they're willing to share. It's just a matter of outreaching and finding out who in your community, whether it's the health department or your substance abuse authority or your school district, they all have information and can help lead you in the right direction for sure.
Thank you.
And I would just add an additional plug for sort of really helping your kids to understand the distinction between being human and imperfect and making mistakes, which might include conflict, might include these mean moments, might even include teasing, and bullying, which is sort of this repetitive and pretty intentional process.
Right.
Because there's another side to this, right? Which if you take a kid who has had a mean moment and you label them as a bully, now the process for them to grow might be stunted. If you look at it as a mean moment and say it's an opportunity to grow, then you provided a pathway for them to grow and learn.
Very true.
Absolutely. We have a question that's come in from somebody that just really wants to be able to define bullying a little bit more. So the question is, it seems like there's some confusion over what bullying really is. Is there a specific state level guidance on what bullying is, or is it every local area is kind of left to define it themselves?
Well, I believe that there is an overarching definition by the Utah State Board of Education, and every district has to have a policy in place that follows that district policy. So I actually took our policy and looked at state policy, and also looked at like stopbullying.org and those kinds of places to make sure that we were all on the same page. But basically, there's 4 different things. They were attacked physically, socially, and or emotionally. There's an unequal balance of power. So whatever that might be, whether it's racial, religious, actual size, those kinds of things. It happens more than once and over a period of time, and I have asked for it to stop. You know, people don't know what they don't know. You know, if my child's being bullied and it's something that's been happening over and over, and say Dema is the principal at the school and this is the first she's hearing of it, then there's not a way for her to have implemented anything if she knows nothing. So, and then also after it happens more than once and I've asked for it to stop, also that it is intentional. It's intentional. Somebody is being hurt on purpose. So those are the 4 critical items.
And I would just add that sometimes the intention is really hard to flesh out. And then I would also add that the perception of bullying is always going to be different than the criterion that we talked about. And so there's 2 sides to this. One is if a child comes to me and says I'm being bullied, we take it as face value and we try and figure out what's going on. And it may be some of these other things, but we start with the listening and the acceptance that something is happening that they don't like. It's happening to them and they think it's intentional. And then we move forward to understand why that's happened. If it is repetitive, hard to really suss out whether it's intentional or not. I would comment about the asking for it to stop part. That's sort of a difference between sort of school policy and what we might say to a parent of a child.
Sure.
Because a lot of times the school doesn't know and the parent doesn't know.
Sure.
And the kid does know, but they don't feel that social agency because there's a
can.
power differential to actually ask for it to stop. So that's just a hard one.
It is a hard one, definitely.
Because if you're smaller,
Yeah.
asking for it to
Right?
stop may not be such a great idea. Asking for it to stop with a teacher standing next to you is actually maybe a little bit easier.
Sure.
But yeah, a lot of times the kids who are being bullied don't feel like they have that agency and power
Sure.
to ask for it to stop.
Yeah,
And
that
so that's
totally
where
makes sense.
we have a growth edge there.
Right. Well, and definitely, like, that's something that when we're educating kids about bullying prevention, we really try to teach them how to ask them to ask somebody to stop. You know, even if it's one time, like, I need, like, this makes me uncomfortable. What are some ways that you can say stop? You know, this makes me really uncomfortable. I don't like when you do that, those kinds of things. So when we're doing our education piece, definitely I definitely could qualify something as bullying even if they didn't ask for it to stop, but that is something that we do teach kids to try and make sure that you communicate that, because someone might be doing those things and not even know that they are doing it.
Yeah. Well, it's a good distinction, right, of sort of the school policy versus maybe some other ways to look at it. One other question that we have, just kind of circling back to some of the things we talked about earlier, is folks are worried that we don't have enough mental health providers in the schools. Is that accurate? If so, how do we help kids that do need that support, but maybe aren't able to access?
Well, I know that there's a mental health grant, and I don't know, I would assume that most districts had the ability to apply for it. But I know in a lot of districts, that's what, you know, even if it's subcontracting services out to outside agencies and not having a social worker in the school. But, you know, I think that you just have to ask, like, what are my options? I don't know that I can bring my child in. Are there other options in our community? because every district is going to be different.
Right.
So I don't know exactly how to answer that, but I think that most school districts have money to provide mental health services for students. It's limited, so it depends. Like in our district specifically, we allow up to 5 sessions for mental health services with a provider that we can assist in paying for after their insurance has kicked in. So so it really just depends on the district and how much money they have and what their access is to a therapist.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, great practical answers for parents at the ground level. At a broader sort of statewide level, I have a couple of different answers. So one, we're currently ranked 51st out of all the states and the District of Columbia in our ability to provide mental health care. That doesn't mean that your specific district, as Julie was talking about, is unable to do so. It just means that we as parents have to understand that if it's a priority for us in the state to have really good mental health care, we need to use our voices together to ask for that. And that includes, growing our training programs for master's level social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, and so on, finding ways to recruit talent to bring them to the state. I would add, on the other hand, that was actually the genesis for why SafeUT was developed. It was a recognition that we had a gap to fill, and stakeholders from all over the state stepped up and are continuing to step up. And I think we should be encouraging and championing those folks to continue on their journey, because we need their support.
That's great. It has provided it's really filled a gap too for providing a service for people who would not otherwise seek mental health services. That because it's been taboo and scary, a scary thing to go see a therapist. But I think that using the app and being able to outreach and be able to speak to a professional has really opened people's eyes to it's not as scary and it is super helpful.
Right.
I would add that it's a change in cultural framework. The cultural framework, used to be that we didn't talk about these things and we just kind of accepted suffering as part of what we were doing and journeyed on. And now we've come to appreciate that we're actually stunting our own growth if we're struggling and not getting help. And so the cultural change is actually trying to grow as people and trying to be more healthy as people. And some of that includes asking for help when you need it.
Absolutely. And to tie on to that, I think SafeUT is not just for students. It's for parents, educators, administrators, teachers, anyone that's connected with somebody in K through 12. So I think that's something that's so important to know, that, if you have questions about, hey, what do I do with this situation my child's in, you can text in and talk to a licensed counselor. So it really is sort of a new way of approaching mental health. I think that is really, culturally appropriate at this time via text. So we're about at wrap up time. So I wonder if the two of you could maybe just recap maybe some takeaway points, if there want folks to get from this discussion, what would they be?
Well, from a school district perspective, I would say there are a lot of resources at your fingertips. And even though we are an educational institution as a school district, we have a lot of community partnerships, but we also have, we are about building relationships with kids and wanting success and positive outcomes for all of our students, not just educationally. So, use your school as a resource, use your school administrator as somebody who is knowledgeable about what some resources are. And if they don't know where they're at, then they will find them. And then just making sure that's one. And then the other one I would say is The same thing that we talked about earlier, communication, but also making sure that we have defined what bullying is and making sure that we're calling it the right thing. So,
Thank you.
you bet.
That was really helpful. So happy
Did I
to
steal
be.
yours?
No, but it was
teasing.
super helpful. I'm glad we get to do this together. This has been super helpful for me too. I would just share with parents that kids are super flexible. They're plastic. They grow all the time, and they also have secrets, and they have secrets that they're not necessarily comfortable sharing with us. And so that lifelong journey really of safe communication may be with you, maybe with the other parent that you have, and maybe with a trusted family member or somebody who's a mental health professional or religious person. Developing those safe space communications early allows them a safe space to talk about things that they're worried about. And if there's one thing I've learned is that most kids are not talking with trusted adults about things that they're struggling with. They're struggling alone. Most kids are not struggling, but of the kids who are struggling, they're struggling alone, and we don't need to have that happen.
Thank you both so much. I think just really a pleasure to talk with both of you and hear your expertise and your passion about the topic. We didn't get to all the questions, so I would encourage folks who are watching to go back and look at the recording. I think there's a lot of rich discussion in there. So thank you both, Julie and Scott, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for those watching, please join us next month to see our conversation on suicide prevention, as it is Suicide Prevention Month in September. So thanks everyone for joining. We will see you next month.